get on that screen.
All right, we just push got it. Will you, Bobby? Get up there and push got it, or no. You don't have to get up there. Andrea, feed into it. This is Senate Appropriations, and we are getting an update on our efforts to have universal broadband throughout the state. And so we're very happy that Christine Hultquist, the executive director, and Fish, deputy director, are here today to give us an update. Obviously, with the federal money, the budget's included very significant amounts in priority areas, broadband being one, housing certainly being another. So we thought we would use these first few days before we get the budget adjustment to get kind of an update on how things are rolling out, what the future is, what the challenges might be, and what we're getting for our money. Okay. So, and we have 2 new members of the committee. So why don't we go around just to introduce ourselves. You want to start, Ginny?
Sure. Ginny Lyons. I represent Chittenden Southeast, and I live in Williston.
Bobby Starr, and I represent Orleans County.
Phil Baruth, I represent Chittenden Central Lab. Andrew Perslick, I represent the Washington District.
Dick Sears, I represent Bennington County and several towns in Windham County and the town of Land Grove, which I'm sure you may have heard about.
Oh, yes, we have.
I have heard of Land Grove.
Land Grove.
No, that's Land Grove is
Sir from New York State, right?
No, it's the one that's split between the 2 CUDs.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Somebody made them a promise, it was in the House, that they were gonna get their broadband last year, and they're still quite upset about not getting it in the Budget Adjustment Act last year. You remember that discussion?
Yes, I do, Senator Sears, and I'm Jane Kitchell, and I'm from Caledonia District. And if you would be kind enough to pass that down. You need to ship, so you got your.
Oh, you were talking about Land Grove.
I'll talk about it.
Good news to
Oh,
share.
definitely, don't pass that up.
Okay. All right, so now that we've taken care of, and do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Will Anderson, representing Plants Management.
Okay, you're,
I'm legislative assistant for Action Service.
all right. So why don't we let you get started? We do have this document here, which I gather is probably the framework of your discussion.
Yes, yes.
What do I need to do?
Sign that, please. Well, thank you for inviting us here. I'm Christine Hultquist. I'm the executive director of Vermont Community Broadband, and with me is Rob Fish, who's the deputy director. And with Rob and I like to say you've got a hologram. I should talk to either one of us. We're tied at the hip. And Rob has been at this a lot longer than I have at the state level. So it's certainly a pleasure to work with Rob. Have that historical background. But of course, this was formed, the VCBB was formed by Legislation Act 71, which, by the way, is now being copied by other states because Nebraska is the latest name. We're kind of the envy of the nation in terms of this legislation. And the reason for that is because with all this federal money that's coming down, there are requirements for public engagement. And of course, thank you for the gift of already having that engagement. So you've got 400 plus volunteers across the state working on getting this stuff.
And then here comes.
Yes, no, we do too.
Sorry, not sorry.
So with that, we have the advantage that we're ahead of the rest of the nation in terms of construction. Our NTIA representative came to our board meeting Monday and said basically to our board, you're ahead of the rest of the nation.
Can you tell us NTI is?
The National Telecommunications and Information Administration. They're the ones that are providing funding.
Is that part of the?
The next fashion one.
What?
Next fashion, yeah, I'll get into the IIHA funding.
Oh.
So they're a standalone organization.
They're in the Department of Commerce.
Okay, thanks. That's why you have 2 of us.
Department of Commerce.
So you'll hear that we have an advantage right now because we're ahead of the rest of the nation. We're able to get materials, we're able to get labor, but our our fear is that as the rest of the nation comes up to speed, it's going to impact materials and labor, but we'll talk about what we're doing about that. And our mission, of course, is defined by Act 71, but I'm going to simplify the mission and say we have 3 objectives. First objective is to get every Vermont address connected within the definition of Act 71, which means that either the town is a member of a CUD or it's a town or community outside of a CUD with a universal service plan working with a telecom provider. So and I will tell you that is covered. We have a plan to do that. We believe with the upcoming minimum coming from the IIJ, $100 billion coming out of the BEAD program. The BEAD is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. Thank you. And so that BEAD program and the equity component is an important part. I'll talk about that in a minute. But so we have the money we believe we have adequate money in the budget to get every Vermonter connected. But the next step is we're focusing on is affordability. And that's really important from a grant perspective. And we do have a lot of funding come our way. We're trying to fund areas that were not economic to serve. So therefore, they're still very expensive. So, we're going to get everybody connected. But at the current business model, at an average for the state, it looks like it's going to be they're going to need to get $90, $100 a month per address.
Right.
That's at 60%. But for every $50 million the state gets, we can reduce the cost to the consumer by $10. So our goal on affordability, working on the affordability code, is to get this 100% grant funded, which we'll talk about the FCC mapping program.
What's that relationship again for every?
Every $50 million in grant funding the state receives, we can reduce the cost to the consumer by $10.
Because we've reduced the cost of the state to underwrite the rollout of broadband?
Well, because 60%.
How do we get that $10?
Yeah, it's less money that has to be spent on the cost of finance.
Yeah, right, it's debt service. So if you look at that, greater than half the cost to the consumer right now, based on the current business model, is debt service. So of course you eliminate debt. And of course with the financing, finance costs are going up. So that we'll talk about what we're doing around contingencies on that. But that second goal of affordability is where we're focused right now.
Do you have a goal or a threshold of what you think affordability or what you'd like to?
Well, what I'd like to see, ideally, if we were able to get this 100% grant funded, we could get the monthly cost down to $50 approximately. And this is an average for the state. And the FCC has what's called an Affordability Connect program. So anybody who's making 200% of the federal poverty line or less will get $30. And there are other programs that cover about an $8. So we could conceivably, best case scenario, get it down to $12 a month for people who are in the lower income strata. So that's.
When you say fund this, what do you mean? What is this?
Fund the capital costs of the infrastructure.
All the infrastructure.
All the
Of
infrastructure.
all the work that all the CUDs.
Right, yes. Yeah.
So we gotta get 50 million about 7 or 8 times.
Yeah, but by the way, that's not out of the realm of possibility. No, so we'll talk about that.
And it's also useful to note that this doesn't necessarily have to be grant funding. The issue that we're having now is the cost of finance. Interest rates have gone up, but 0% or even a 1% fund that's revolving could have the same exact impact. So
Well, yeah.
we'll get to all this later. We're gonna.
Well, let me
way
give you
ahead
the
of
numbers
ourselves.
on the finance. We had a 0% financing. So go with that. I'm going to give you what the spreadsheet says. $91 a month is really what we show for what's called the average revenue required per customer right now. If we got to 0% interest rate, that would go down to $72. So if we got to 0, we could cut it significantly. If we got it all grant funded, we could get down to 50.
And then these other supports.
There are other supports that could get that delta down to
Subsidies
$12.
to get it down to 12.
So I'm going to make the point is right now our major goal is to get as much grant funding as possible.
Yes.
Earlier you said we have enough money to connect every Vermonter. Oh, but then you're saying we need a bunch of money. So what's the difference?
Yeah, so let me hit the 3 goals first, then I'll come back to that. First goal is get everybody connected. Second goal is make it affordable. And the third goal I want to talk about as well is how do we maximize positive social impact from these investments? So that, remember, getting everybody connected, and I talked about this last year, we talked about this in legislation last year, the year before. We believe that you need to get, because the CUDs are startup, in order to be able to go to the bond market, they need to have 60% of the capital costs covered by grants. And then they can go to the bond market and the financing market for the 40%. So getting everybody connected means right now the model with what I'll call it the worst case financial model says that 40% needs to go out and get financed. So you're going to build it and borrow money for the rest of it. That gets everybody connected.
Do we have the money for the 60%? Is that what you said?
Yeah, we have. So the 60% is based on $345 million. We estimate the project costs right now are running probably closer to $600 million for the entire. So that's where you get this idea. We do see, if we do this all right and everything, all the stars align, we could get that 600 million, but there's a lot to do to get there.
We could get it from
the
grants.
And we'll hit this in the presentation. We have a middle mile application of $116.7 million project. And then there's $100 million minimum is what the states get. And then we're going to get funded additional funds. The estimate is around $4,000 to $5,000 for every address that will get another. So I'm sorry, let me go back. The BEAD program gives a $100 state minimum, and then they credit you for every underserved address that you provide. And right now our maps are approximately 20,000 off.
Oh, I know.
So
yeah.
it may be more, but with 20,000 at $5,000, you're talking $100 million, right? That could be another 100 million move on to that. So we've got the plans in place to get it. And then of course we want to hit the third component of this, which is maximizing positive social impact, as well as minimizing negative social impact. You already know what the negative social impact is because you're working on it. It's called housing, right? Because if we're successful today, we're 26th in the nation in terms of connectivity. We'll go to #1 in the nation. Goal is, of course, is to attract high intellectual margin businesses. And we saw with COVID, the pressure was to put on housing. So obviously everybody in the legislation working on housing. So that's minimizing negative impact. Positive impacts are, if you look at people who aren't connected today, they're primarily from lower income. They're on the other side, just like the rural divide. That economic divide is even exacerbated by the lack of connectivity. So that people on the low income can't participate in telehealth, telemedicine, or telehealth, teleeducation, and even social, even socialization today. So that, we have programs to address this. That's kind of what you're going to see in the presentation. We'll run through this.
In our ag, a lot of our ag producers are in rural areas, and a lot of that new material solves that on.
Oh, you should know you just made my day, because early on, I'm gonna plug the farms that feed the Jasper Hill cheese. There's a young woman up there that's a positive social impact. Agriculture is shown that you can reduce nutrient application by at least 30% with good using this technology. And I'll give you an example. I spoke to the young woman. She was a master's from UVM. She's the manager for the 900-acre farm that feeds Jasper Hill cheese. She's really jamming to get broadband, because she said,
They don't have it.
well, they don't, because they're out remote. They can't get the wireless. So
I've been there.
So
it's not like Leamington. Or,
they drive 100 miles. She drives 100 miles each day just to check the moisture content of the field. That can all be done remotely. And you think about the non-value added time of driving. Using her brains can be used for a lot more value than driving around 100 miles a day, right? So would love to see Vermont.
Well, you need all this too to manage electrical consumption.
Yes,
and
I
charging your
speak to the
vehicles and your appliances and you name it. So the applications are probably more than we can even envision at this
Yeah,
point.
we probably can't. So
We look at it as an equity issue because it does touch everything in our lives. Like we had a press conference over the summer when the first reels of fiber showed up at the rec yard, and these folks from Whitingham brought their family. The two kids wanted to study video gaming and computer stuff, but they couldn't because they didn't have access to internet. They wanted to remain in their communities. So this is as much about telework, remote learning, all those types of things as just maintaining rural communities as a place for the next generation to want to stay and live.
Yeah.
And at the other end of the spectrum, we talk about aging in place, the different telehealth.
Some of us can relate to that.
Yeah, we're aging.
But it's like if you have a full.
Very odd.
But there's technology out there that can be used where it's almost everybody's, like their bedroom could be turned into the equivalent of a hospital bed. Being able to be monitored, being able to receive treatment and stay with their family in place rather than take up a hospital bed. So it touches on everything. We could go on for the next hour about that, but.
And then, of course, as Christine pointed out, what are some of those collateral impacts and the negative ones? And certainly, people who are mobile and who can move to Vermont are generally higher income and they have employment that they can work to a large extent remotely. And so everybody's concerned about, demographics and we need more people, but I'm afraid we're going to just exacerbate that social divide and the cost of housing and availability for housing for Vermonters with the more moderate incomes are going to be priced out. We see that anyway. So it's certainly when you look out west, you look at Aspen, you look at, a lot of those communities. So it's part of, this is a wonderful resource and the potentials are enormous, but we've got to think about what are going to be some of those collateral impacts and how we plan for them.
yeah, and then what I'm telling you is we recognize that that's part of our responsibility. That's the third element we talk about, maximizing positive social impact. We talk about, if you look at the Northeast Kingdom, you roll on energy burden with the amount of travel that people do in the Northeast Kingdom. That's this positive side is it can help reduce the amount of travel for people in the Northeast Kingdom. But the negative side is the housing prices. So, and with any technology shift or this happens, right? But good, and I've always loved Vermont. I'm always proud of Vermont. We always take the lead, but we're a small state. We can work together to tackle some of these big problems. That said, this being planful around these technology shifts is the most important thing we can do.
But who is leading, or how do we, that planning and that thinking, where is that happening?
Well, I think you see, we are doing that. That's part of our job.
You are, but you're only a small piece of that larger environment being impacted.
Well, that's why you have us sitting here, right? We're part of your solution. We all need to work together on this issue. And what I'm telling you is we're committed to go. We're talking specifically about the benefits of digital connection,
right?
But we also we want to take responsibility to work closely with the legislature to avoid. We want to maximize positive impact, which also means minimizing the negative impact.
We have also from the beginning was starting the communication districts and working closely with all of the regional planning commissions. So that they have even a wider perspective of how any type of development affects their community. And it's not just broadband, anything that's transportation, any and everything affects everything. I feel like.
Well, John Muir said everything is connected to everything else. And but a lot of how we approach things, or even our committee jurisdiction, tends to compartmentalize and at some point, and this is why this committee, I think it's the beauty of this committee, is where most everything, because it brings the price tag, comes together. Senator Sears, do you want to philosophize a bit more, or you?
But no, I just want to talk about affordability for a minute.
Yes.
I'm with Comcast. I probably am staying there for some simple reason that it's beyond my ability to go to Fidium or whatever that is, not my area. But I'm spending like $75 a month for internet. You know, as long as I'm, here and afford it, that's fine. But there's a lot of people who are gonna have a hard time. So their internet experience will be a lower because Comcast prices on your speed.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I could spend $200 and have the greatest speed in the world, but I don't want to do that. But how do we, and most people don't understand. So their kids want to play games in Whitingham. So they're going to want high-speed internet. So can they afford the $75 a month that allows you to play a game? Or I don't even know what it costs to play a game. All I know is that this is what we decided we could afford.
Well, let me ask you a question too.
Well, so that's the real question is, how do we make it affordable, but at the same token, these private companies like Comcast who are in business to make money, how do we make it so people understand what their choices are?
So this is, the CUDs are offering, and by the way, it's not Act 71. Act 71 requires this to be what's called 100 megabits per second download, 100 megabits per second upload, asynchronous. So by default, you're going to have the bandwidth. So when you look at, so to give you an example on cable, good cable, which you often don't find this number, but is, will give you 100 megabits per second download, 20 megabits upload. That's good cable. Most people have less than that, but unless you're in an urban area like Burlington, which has a typical telecom. But so the point is, we're not going to have that tiered system. It's 100 megabits per second.
Yeah, I want everybody.
And the other point I'll make too is, oftentimes people pay.
Private switch?
Well, I'm not going to tell you that yet. Let me. Do you pay for cable television at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, you won't have to pay for cable television when you get 100 megabits synchronous. So, for example, in my house, I don't even want to get into my system because I'm a recovering engineer. I bond Starlink and I bonded the DSL. I bonded mobile wireless with the software. So, but I've got good bandwidth. So at my house, I don't have cable. You get the technology is shifting, so you're going to get all your channels through that one payment. So when you talk about affordability, you have to think about all the money you're spending on various sources. How much money you spend on your cell phone, how much you spend on cable television, how much you spend on internet, because it's converging to one pipe.
And that's part of the digital equity push. It's also about digital literacy, about being able to use the new tools at your disposal to save funds and get the most advantage out of the various technologies. But it's a shift. It's a cultural shift, and it costs money, and it requires change, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take resources. It's something that can be managed to some extent, but we should also know that we're not alone. All across the country, that they're investing in fiber. They've heard the news that this is a once in a lifetime investment, and we need to be spending it on the other states. From what we're hearing, sorry, that this is a once in a lifetime investment. There's not going to be money like this coming down anytime soon.
And if you look at fiber, if you look at the major providers, for example, Fidium, which is consolidated, they're switching to fiber because it's the lowest cost, life cycle cost. Fiber lasts a long time. When I was the CEO for Mount Electrical, we were using fiber from the 70s, same performance, right? So the idea is this technology shift is happening. It's a much more reliable technology, and it's the least cost. So you're going to see that shift happen, and because of Act 71, Vermonters are going to benefit because they'll have lower cost overall data services, which includes all those things. If you look at the average Vermonter, people are paying.
So I'm paying for 800 Mbps download speed and 20 upload.
Yeah, 800 kilobits per second. Right? That's a little less than 1 meg. That's your 800 kbs, did you say, or 800 mbps?
800
MBS or KBS?
Mbps.
Oh, you're getting good bandwidth. Yeah.
Not the other day, not Friday.
So as you're talking and thinking through, okay, we're paying for internet and streaming and, but, so what you're doing is you're serving new access, so how am I gonna get the 100 up, 100 down? When is that gonna happen? How is that replacement gonna occur? Will that occur at all?
You're located in Chittenden County, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so we're focusing on the underserved and unserved areas. Your area, because you're a profitable area to service.
We're never gonna see, we're not gonna see. what-
Oh, it's poetic justice.
Yeah.
Trump.
Poetic justice, but
But
What it does-
the global price, by the way, the United States, it's inevitable that you're gonna ship to lower prices because those areas that are being served today, it's a competitive market. So you're seeing entrants like Consolidated that are providing $80 for 100, 500. So
it's also that these areas that our focus is on the areas that are unserved or underserved now because there wasn't a business need.
Right.
The areas that are cable right now, 5 years from now, or maybe in many cases even 2 or 3 years from now, that is likely to be fiber.
Yeah.
And there likely will be competition because there is a market for it and there's a demand. And we're also creating the demand by serving the areas that haven't had access to this before.
So you're all set. That's all I have to say.
You just have to be patient.
I'll be patient.
So let me move to this slide here, because
So let's get, I think we're on slide 2, so.
go back to that.
We tend to kind of want to talk about what we want to talk about.
No, well, I just want to say what's happened last year.
All right,
You know,
that's good.
Last year was all about standing up the CUDs and standing up our staff. It's important for us, first of all, we're providing technical and financial resources to CUDs. More importantly, the upcoming broadband equity access and deployment funds, the $100+ million I'm talking about, the federal governments are looking at states to make sure their broadband offices have the capacity. And so we spent the last year getting our capacity in place. If you look at this org chart here, we've got a whole area. What you see here is the dark blue is direct reports. The light blue is contracted services. If you look over here, you see a lot of work around the engineering side. So we're in good shape. And by the way, the NTIA confirmed Monday that we're in good shape in terms of what we've done. And that's because we have the engineering side heavily covered. We've got this area here where we focus on creative, I shouldn't touch that, yeah. Creative finance means whatever we need to get financed, we're gonna try to do it at the lowest possible rate. So for example, one of the areas we focus on that can get us lower rates is focusing on ESG bonds, environmental, social, and governance bonds. We've got all 3 of those areas covered. On the environmental side, it's about optimizing the grid through smart grid, providing consumers an opportunity to partake in programs like, special energy programs. So that's an example of what we do at Creative Finance. Get very low rates in bonds. Stop doing that. So then we've got Lucy. You may know Lucy Rogers. She's kind of a focus on terms of the relationship with the CUDs. Then we have our grant support, and we have.
How many CUDs do we have?
We have
There's 10 CUDs now, yeah, 204 the town. Well, we have a slide later that shows that most of the areas that aren't CUDs are being taken care of otherwise at this point. So we're at a good place. One thing I just want to mention with this slide, and one thing that makes Vermont's model different, we're focusing on building out broadband, but we're also focusing on accountability and oversight. This makes our project a lot bigger than what other states are doing and requires a lot more capacity. Like, we're building 10 new organizations that are gonna keep going, living on, and provide some of that oversight and accountability that the federal government has decided.
Ultimately end up creating more infrastructure and costs than might be desirable at some point in the future.
Well, because we're using fiber optic cable, we have, and this is in the 10-year telecom plan, by the way. There's a slide in there that shows this. This is the least cost technology that exists.
I was talking about staffing and the creation of
Well, this,
multiple CUDs.
It's one of the things, well, I think it's in there later that we'll talk about. We are seeking some funding so the CUDs can have and share a broadband specific CFO to look for more of those efficiencies. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next year or two especially CUDs that go the route of a public-private partnership, if there's some mergers that happen, to cut down on those costs. But as you know, Vermonters are very attached to their region. And that's been a big advantage so far in terms of wanting to build your region, wanting to build your CUD. But that is something that we are aware of. Is that
And don't forget, we've got over 400 volunteers across the state working on their own dime to make this happen. The other states don't have.
Free labor.
Yeah. Next slide.
Yeah, you have some communities that are putting
Yeah, next
money
slide.
into their ARPA money.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get to all that. Here. So you form the VCB board. We have a board with 2 appointees from the governor, 1 from the House side, 1 from the Senate side, 1 from the CUD side. And of course, I was appointed by the governor. First meeting was held August 2021. We've had 43 meetings, 4 hours each. Good attendance, and all of our minutes are posted on our website. This board is a very seasoned board, very deliberative board. And every grant is reviewed by the board. And we'll show you later that we have a dashboard of progress that is available to all of you and as well as any citizens of Vermont.
And then it's useful to note that each of these CUDs also have a board, are also acting in the public interest and in public oversight. So it just keeps, the number of people that are involved in this effort, the NTA doesn't have any concerns about our public engagement efforts.
I wouldn't think so, but sometimes it becomes so large, it becomes,
Yes.
Well, remember, this
right.
may be one of the largest infrastructure projects that Vermont has embarked upon, is its electrification of rural.
Or maybe the interstate.
Yeah, maybe the interstate, right? So it's a huge project. And if you look at the electrification of Vermont, I think Victory got electricity in 1964, right?
Yeah, it wasn't.
So you look at electricity, we started in 1936. Kind of finished up in 64. We're trying to go a lot faster here.
You can go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the various CUDs. We're not going to go into depth, but just at a very high level of where we're at. As of November elections, we're about 10 CUDs. Chittenden County is the newest one. The town members voted by over 90% on average to create the new CUD. Jericho has since joined, and it's very likely that many of the neighboring towns will also be joining in the next few months. We now have many of the CUDs are in the construction phase. Most of this past year has been stuff behind the scenes. It's been building capacity. It's been doing the studies, doing the engineering, getting the funding in place, doing the make ready. Well, now they're hanging fiber, which is exciting. It's happened fast, and next year we expect this to accelerate further. It's the NEK is the furthest ahead, other than EC fiber, which has been around for a little while. CV fiber is connecting homes in Calais. Deerfield Valley connected a few homes, I believe, it might actually be Whitingham. I'm sorry, Whitingham or Stamford as their pilot project to make sure all their systems are in place. Southern Vermont, they are partnering with Consolidated, and they will have the entire county plus Winhall and Londonderry built out by the end of this year.
Yeah, but what about Landgrove?
Including Landgrove, sorry, including Landgrove.
Can't forget Landgrove.
We will not forget
Don't
Landgrove.
forget Stanford. I thought that was.
I believe there's 16 addresses that won't be connected because they're served from New York or Massachusetts, and rather than spend millions to connect those, they're working with the providers from the other side of the border.
I read a while back, and does the FCC, I don't remember, there are auctions or opportunities that Starlink, for example, got a contract to for the.
Oh, yeah, you're talking about
Can you?
Well, the FCC has.
That's
one good thing the FCC has done is that they have not fully awarded it to Starlink anymore, but they have created a bit of a checkerboard pattern across the state, which is something each of the CUDs are dealing with.
Okay, well, that's what I was wondering how this is.
Yeah, what you're talking about is what's called the RDOF program.
RDOF. I didn't know that's what it was, but.
Rural deployment opportunities.
It was, yeah, I think
we'll talk about the FCC later.
Yeah, I think the nation has recognized that was a bad process. So.
But as see, we have our CUDs have begun construction. There's stuff happening even though it's winter right now. We're excited. We have construction grant applications from each of those. We're expecting from Lamoille and Northwest and EC Fiber in the next few months, followed likely by Otter Creek and then Chittenden. Like our goal is to have construction plans in place, whether it's them building it themselves with their expert contractors or via public-private partners, likely by the middle of the year. So things in motion, but it covers 93% of the premises that don't have access to 25.3 right now. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the other areas.
I think Senator Burchett
Oh,
has a
sorry.
question on the other side.
The construction that's happening now, has that been the money that they received through the state? So that financing is already starting, that they're doing that with the money they have?
This is state money. This is from that's the ARPA
ARPA money
funds,
that we
yes.
appropriated for. broadband.
Yes, so that is being activated. Well,
Was it 240? I forgot. Plus the ability to draw down these grants to be another 100 million. Plus, one has to be matched and one is you get 100.
Oh, yeah, we'll get into that match in a month. But so I say, Senator Burchett,
And it's fine.
you brought up an interesting point that I just want to emphasize this. The CUDs can't borrow yet. You know, they have to have 3 years audited financials before they go to the borrowing market, which is why our plan is to fund their first 3 years of grant construction.
and hopefully more. Like it's one big realization we had is with EC Fiber, it's taken them over 10 years to get to where they're at. We're trying to compress that into 3 to 5 years. And in many of these, it'll be exceeding that. So it's the model is a little bit different, and that's where it runs into some of the challenges, let's say. Yeah, but let's go to the next slide, and I'll tell you about some of the other areas, because while we are focusing in on the CUDs, we are concerned about the entire state. Going from north to south, Northern Borders Regional Commission funded a grant to the town of Fletcher to build out fiber to the premise. They're one of the towns that's not in the CUD at this point.
Fletcher will own and bill, and it'll be like a municipal utility.
It's somewhat like that. There's a lot to get into there.
Like hardwood collector.
Well, that's what I wondered.
Yeah, they have, I think it's a 100-year lease with the provider for use of that fiber. They're gonna have to address some challenges over the next year that will become apparent. But going a little further south, we have the Waitsfield WCDT area. We did fund them for a grant for their entire service territory to start the process of upgrading. It's gonna be a phased process, starting with Bolton and Charlotte. But they're also just upgrading where necessary for the maintenance of the network as well. The other half of their territory is part of Maple Broadband, and they also received a grant for those areas. Heading further south, you have the various areas that are served by VTEL. As an ILEC, they did receive funding to build out a fiber network. They claim to serve all of their customers, have the ability to serve all of their customers with fiber. We also have in the Weathersfield area that we have TDS, which is Ludlow and Perkinsville Telephone Company. They have told us they are planning fiber to at least 90% of their customers, as well as in Northfield, starting in the next few months. We expect them to come to us to provide funding to serve the rest. Other parts of the area, like Weathersfield's an interesting place. Part of it's served by VTEL, part of it's TDS, part of it's consolidated. We expect the part that's served by consolidated to be served by EC Fiber most likely.
The one in green looks like
The one down the
Bennington County. Is that Landgrove?
That's Glastonbury.
Oh,
So those 9 people now have access to fiber.
Jesus.
So
Why should Lima Victory Center?
That's actually Glastonbury is a wonderful town and a wonderful gore in my district.
Well, now they
There's
have
7
better
people there. I think
They have
there's
better
7.
service than you.
I know, there's 7 people there.
Well, we gotta get up in the kingdom. We got some real doors up there.
I can't wait to have the press conference in the town of Victory. When we say instead of 60 years or 30 years,
have
instead of 30. I don't know, not right now, but.
Well, I'm in England, the few people that remember is Victory when it had no electricity.
Oh, exactly.
But I think of it just what we're saying is that there is a plan in place, or at least the skeleton of a plan for most parts of the state. And as we mentioned earlier, the areas that are currently served by cable, there's going to be some competition there. It's what the market is pointing to, or maybe the cable companies will decide to upgrade to qualifying technology. either way, it's moving the needle of what we're doing here.
So what's going on in those counties where there's no circles, like, down in Bennington, it looks like, no, Brattleboro, looks like there's no
Those are
circles.
the areas.
These are
those
covered by the
CUDs.
CUDs. This,
Yes.
what we're talking about is those areas that are not covered by CUDs.
Well, they don't have.
Yeah, they're on, yeah,
They either chose.
Yeah, the
chose
white-
not to,
the
or
white
there
ones
wasn't as
don't
much
have
demand.
What's the little white one next to the Northeast Kingdom there, Christine?
That's shared between the two CUDs.
yeah, that one right there.
What town is that?
Is that Wolcott? Is that your town?
That's my town, yeah, welcome.
It's your town. all
Christine
right.
likes CUDs so much, she wanted to join two of them. So.
It doesn't have any service at this point, other than my Starlink.
So we're making progress, and there's some areas of Rutland County that aren't part of CUDs. They're served entirely by cable, but they're likely to be included in the plan for building out Rutland County. That's Otter Creek.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next slide. I'll go through some of these quickly. We have two major grant programs. We have pre-construction. So this is to build the capacity, to fund the studies, to make sure they have the expertise necessary for both building a broadband network, managing the federal grant funds, and just accountability and oversight. We also added materials, the pre-purchase of materials that are dealing with supply chains to this program. And then there's the construction program. We're at this point, we're moving from pre-construction to construction and have administered a lot of those grants already. Go into the next slide, please. So it's the process. It's not simple. We're not writing blank checks to these groups. You'll be very well sure that we are not doing that. There's quite the process that's involved before the grant application can be placed to the board, and that continues throughout the grant administration. So I'm sorry, it's a little bit smaller on the screen there than I expected. But once they submit an application, it's reviewed by staff. We work with them to cure the application. Then it is reviewed by CTC. There are fiber optic consultants and our granting consultants that are very familiar with all the different rules of the program, both the federal rules and the rules we've established. We've established outside plant design standards. Make sure if we are going to be building this, it needs to have the capacity, not just for now, but 30 years from now. So they check those two things and also work directly with the grantees. Only with a positive recommendation from both them and the staff do we bring it to the board for discussion.
So how many grants have been approved and how much?
It'll be a slide.
Yeah, you'll get it.
Yeah, I'd rather not pull it off the top of my head. So the presentation to the board, so they do a whole presentation as the CUD, and we have a very deliberative board. It can take 4 to 5 meetings to get through a grant application to get approval, which it's a lot, but we're making sure that we're doing our due diligence, as this is a lifetime investment. And then once we approve a grant, it keeps going. They have to have their detailed design approved, once again, by CTC to look for any opportunities for collaboration, reducing the costs, making sure they're taking advantage of any tariff reductions. Then we get to construction. We have to approve each of the designs. But the construction finishes, we're doing an as-built inspection of the network to make sure that they followed everything that's said in the grant agreements, that they achieved their universal service plan, reaching every address that's on the grid.
So you go back, somebody goes and checks the construction crew to make sure it's done properly.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yes. And that's why we are about to hire an in-house fiber optic engineer to be able to do that and to provide additional assistance on make ready and other side of things, to start the hiring process. It takes a while.
On the construction phase, do you contract for a certain length of time to do a certain number of miles, or?
Yes,
For this first sets of grants, they had to present what they could accomplish within 2 years.
and they're fixed price contracts.
And there's several phases within
You
that.
don't
So
have a
they can't
contract,
run
CUD have.
CUD has a contract with their providers. Yeah, each one of those, that's part of our review is looking at the construction partner.
so they can't run away on us and not finish the job? I mean, somebody's
Yeah.
checking them.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. And if it's what we're calling a conventional versus a phase grant, if they're working with a public-private partnership, they are paid upon completion, and we withhold to make sure they do report it. So when it comes to the CUDs, we know these are newer organizations, but they are have more public accountability by definition.
You end up working with, like WEC, I know was talking about doing it, and none of the distributed utilities decided.
No, WEC actually dropped out of that as well, so.
So, next slide, please. So, oops. So long-term sustainability, as you mentioned, we're doing a different model. We're not just paying for building construction, we're building new entities that need to be doing this oversight for years to come. So when we're examining like we're looking for an Act 71 compliant business plan, and this is the other thing that our fiber optic and grants that CTC so it looks at is to make sure there's a plan, make sure they've identified risks that they propose. We want them to be looking over the horizon because it's not just the capital costs, it's also the operating costs and the financing costs that come into this. Make sure that we have what we call an Act 71 compliant business plan. Things do happen, but we are doing our due diligence to make sure that we're planning for the future here.
Are there, with the benefit of experience, you keep referencing Act 71, are there, sometimes when you pass legislation with the benefit of experience, you need to make some changes. Do you envision, do you think that there are going to be the need to amend that legislation in any way, or for now, it seems to have provide the necessary framework?
I gotta tell you, it's a really good piece of legislation. You know, we don't, you know, we talk about the Budget Adjustment Act that's coming, but as far as the legislation goes, we're not looking for any changes. It's a really well-crafted piece of legislation. Again, the rest of the country is a little jealous.
Very much so. You did good.
I know it's probably hard to handle as a legislature that you got a really good piece of legislation.
Yeah,
I don't hear that very often, but I'm very.
Actually,
When they call and ask for directions from you guys, do you charge them for that info?
we at this point, we are not doing a fee for service model.
Yeah.
Education's expensive, right?
I think they call it consulting.
Yeah, they do.
So, and I think if like we had to look at any challenge, it's not really a legislative challenge. It's just, we said, they're doing this across the country. So talent is expensive to get and to keep. We're sticking around. We're trying to keep everybody else sticking around, but even hiring for positions has been challenging.
Yeah, we're.
According to the paper anyway.
What's that?
I said, you've been recruited for other jobs, you've decided.
Well, I'm at a point in life where, you know, I'm at a great point in life, right, where I can do what my passion
Yeah.
is. But, you know, when you're talking to a younger person raising a family and those kind of things, you know, we're losing, just for example, we've got one of Adam Bornstein who's taken a job as a CFO for a $42 billion climate fund, right? So, you know, we're going to lose people.
I think everybody on staff has had inquiries. I'll leave it at that.
But you should know,
From other states,
Adam's
from
not
other
leaving.
agencies.
Adam's not leaving for money, he's leaving.
We know the Clay Purvis,
Yeah.
Director of Telecom, is now with the NTIA, State Director. So there's a state broadband leaders listserv where we're all competing and talking about how great our states are and do you want to come work for us?
And
what's
Rob,
happening. It's
people keep trying to steal Rob too, by the way, and I'm trying to treat him well, so.
not going anywhere, but the only thing we've had challenges with the hiring is also more just the flexibility. Like needs change, processes change, federal programs change, or interpretations of them change quite a bit. So that's been a challenge with the positions that if we come back asking for other positions, we may ask for much more general classifications that we could use rather than some of the delays that has caused. But it's been a learning experience. But we do also have funding elsewhere. We have that NBC funding grant. We have two of those grants actually, and that you mentioned the broadband project manager that Adam, who's now leaving, but he's been working on a lot of the creative financing side of things, and we believe we are going to be using a state capacity grant to further do the broadband CFO and provide other support at the CUD level, because it's trying to figure out what makes sense to keep in state government versus what should be maintained by these local entities.
Rob, I'm just looking, I realize this presentation has precipitated a lot of questions, and we have kept you from your script, and I'm just looking. So we have until 3, and then so I don't know how many more slides.
Yeah, what do we do?
So I would suggest we zip through the presentation
Sure.
so that we can for the benefit of all
I was
people.
getting worried about that. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so you asked how much we've put out the door so far. We've awarded $122 million in grant funding. This doesn't include the 2 grants we approved this week for it's at the very bottom of the screen there, but I think it's another 2.6 million. And this is just talking about ARPA funds at this point. We can go to the next slide. So this is just breaking it down in really small print.
Yeah, we don't have it.
I think
So
we'll
we won't
have
even
to
try.
believe you.
We won't even try to do that, but that's just the funding that we've provided so far to the CUDs via the ARPA funding. Key constraints.
That's what Sisyphus, that's what it was.
So this key, if you look at our constraint, if you talk, these 2 areas, make ready, or our capital, materials and labor, that's going to be exasperated further as we get, as the rest of the country comes online. But for materials, we pre-purchased materials. Last year, we spent about $7 million to get the long lead time materials. Fiber takes a year to get, so we made sure we got all the materials ahead of time. We saved $2 million, by the way, by doing that because of that group purchase. So we're addressing materials through pre-purchase, labor. We've got a really robust workforce development team. Includes the state colleges. I don't want to call them.
Next, 3.
Yeah, state university. I'm not sure what you call them these days, but and then access to capital. You heard we're working on that. Delays with make ready. We highlight that because you look whenever you do a project management, look what is key rocks that are going to be in the road. Make ready is the work that's done by the electric utilities to prepare the poles for the telecom wires. Reason that's on there is because it takes 4 years. The people doing the electrical work, it takes 4 years to develop a line worker. The utilities have been working very closely with us on these schedules. It's not a problem at this point. And then the FCC maps, we'll get into in a moment.
We'll just zoom in through different slides. We'll go to the next one. We talk about creative financing.
We talked about that enough. I think we skipped that one.
So we talked about the joint fiber. We could talk briefly about workforce.
Yeah. So here's
leveraging existing programs. This is a good one to touch on. This is from funding that we've been holding on to. It was 1.5 million, I believe, 2020 of general funds for the CUDs to leverage the VITA programs. When all the ARPA funding came along, that took precedence. But now we're using that program to be able to buy down the interest rate to save on financing for other programs. And this is in support of a $24 million USDA Reconnect application from the kingdom. So we're working on those things that way.
I'll make a point on the workforce development. We call it a pay it forward program. It's because what we've done is we've worked with all the regional construction companies. And the idea is we take, if this creates an opportunity for miners to get into a career. We train them as fiber optic technicians, but from there they can go on, they can work for BEIC and smart grid and weatherization programs. We even have a track for people to become professional engineers working with the colleges to get credit. But the key is when you're low income, you can't afford to lose your income. So we pay people to get trained. And we've got agreements with the companies that are going to employ them that they'll pay them from day one. They said, if you do all this work, we develop the curriculum with the private companies so that we now got a commitment from them that says, when they're done with your training program that you're paying for, we'll put them right to work. And then over the next 5 years, we'll pay back that money that it cost you so that this can become like a revolving plan to pay forward.
So we go to the next slide. We mentioned the matching. We'll skip right to the next one. I'll show you the towns that have already contributed local fiscal recovery. These are more flexible funds. It says, as we said, we're connected. We have people from every single town. They're realizing how important this is to them and how it touches on everything in terms of development. And we're planning on matching this using these as match funds via the
Look at the Northeast
program.
Kingdom, that's really impressive.
Yeah, the different CUDs are at different stages with approaching this. We only updated the program, I believe, in November, but we're at 40 towns, $2.585 million. So we're excited about that. And it's also our way to continue community engagement efforts. Then we'll go to the next slide. This is one that we want to make sure we touch on because there's a request that'll be coming to you.
This is part you may have heard from some of our critics on this issue, but there was a program that, and so this addresses 2 things. This addressed building a statewide reliable and resilient network and gets us more grant funds. the federal government made $1 billion available to the states for a competitive grant program to do what they call middle mile. And those grants are, very competitive. They're talking about 10 to 15 grants. So we put together a $114 million proposed network with 1,663 miles using wherever there's existing fiber. We're working with Velco and the private telecom companies to use existing fiber so we don't duplicate efforts.
We'll have to do an RFP process.
Yeah. But what you see here are what's called redundant rings. So, these are fiber rings that are set up so if they're what's called geographically redundant. So if a tree comes down on one side, it feeds from the other side. This addresses a lot of the issues. Well, this definitely addresses the issues we have 911 failure. Because this, we're working with Consolidated to look at those areas. They've been involved with this to address those, what they call point of presence that
Yeah,
don't
and
have.
that's something I wanted to know. We reached out to all of these other providers and what can we help you solve if we get this grant
So
application?
what's the criticism, Christine?
Well, I think, I think there's, last year, there was a lot of talk about, are we going to do a statewide fiber design? I said, yes, but let's not hold up the program for that. I'm kind of coming back to you saying, we did what we said we were going to do last year. Last year, we didn't want to hold up the program to do the statewide design because it could have set us back.
There's also concern of that there's a lot of unknowns at this point, and we don't know where we are in the process yet. So we aren't spending a lot of time on the detailed engineering that's going to determine exactly what route and what fiber and all that is going to be built right now versus what is part of the larger plan going forward. So we just don't have a lot of answers right now. So I think that's a
Is
concern.
that a chicken and egg kind of?
Yeah, we got to get, we're competing for the grant. We filed a very robust grant application.
And if you don't get the grant, then.
We're still going to build this
Yeah,
network.
and that's how this also accelerates the build out is
Yeah, but the appropriations specifically for the.
Well, the appropriations. So this is where this is really, I'm sure your ears are perked up at this point, but, in the budget adjustment act, you're going to see $30 million
For the grant for this.
for the match.
For the match.
For the match.
But if you don't get the grant, then the match isn't needed.
Well, we still need it. We want to build this middle mile network, but we're tying that match, what's driving that match is this application.
Yeah, and this is the way, like, we're gonna talk a little bit about that there might be a funding gap. We talk about how it's all beneficial that we're so ahead of the other states. Well, the BEAD program might be a little bit behind in distributing the funds. And the last thing we want is any type of gap in funding. If these construction crews stop working, they're gonna be picked up by other states and be more expensive next time around. So this was part of our vision of how we could fill that gap. If we do not get this funding, we may be back talking to you about, we mentioned 0%.
So if you got the grant, you get 114 million from the grant, plus the 30 million match.
No, that 30 million is a subset of the grant. 30
Of the 114.
30 leverages the other 74.
So it's a 114
The other
rush.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But if we do get this, it'll allow us to accelerate because we can be putting up the last mile
So
fiber
what
at
you're
the same time.
proposing is, then if you don't get the grant, you don't want it, normally if it's for appropriated for a specific.
We still want to use it to
You
build.
still
that
want
middle
the
mile.
money, but we would have to say what we're appropriating it for.
Yeah, I think you should appropriate for a middle mile construction.
But
Well,
it would only be 30 of the 114 million.
Well, we may have to borrow money. We may have to borrow money to do the rest. This is the right thing to do from a Vermont standpoint. We're building a 40-year network. We've got redundant connections in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, and Canada. The idea is to make this a highly reliable network. I'll just, as a plug, I come from the electric utilities, and I will tell you, telecom is even more important than electricity.
So a lot of this is going to be built as part of the CUD plans. We just want to be using other funding to build it to further leverage the ARPA dollars. So that's,
So if we put the 30 in, does that give you any leverage on your grant saying, hey, we've
Yes.
already got our share of the money
yes.
to offset the $80 million grant? So
But I'm thinking, this question's been raised to me. If you don't get the grant and the 30, you don't need the 30 million as match, then what happens to the 30 million?
30 million goes to build that network.
Then we would need to make sure that we're clear that that in fact is what we're authorizing that 30 million for as a contingent.
And is it fair to say if we gave you the 30 million, you didn't get the grant,
if you kept the 30 million, it would then come from more money.
Well, I wouldn't want to go there because that's really, we're gonna figure, we may have, this gets to the affordability issue, right? If we have to go finance it, it increases rates, but you've got a little bit of a tougher job, right? Because you're trying to figure out where the funds go, whether it goes to housing or broadband or those kind of things. You'll have to make that decision. It's not, what I'm telling you is, we'll leave the 30 million, but we're gonna build that network regardless.
Right.
So at this point, this seemed like the best opportunity to leverage additional federal funds.
That's the best case.
Yeah, we want to, this is our best chance to leverage additional federal funds at this point, but it's still going to be needed, whether it's for any gap between when the ARPA funds are used up, believe it or not, and when the BEAD funds come in, or for doing these connections between the different CUDs. A lot of these will be built by the CUDs. We just want to use this funding so the other funding can be used for additional last mile.
So in your discussions in other arenas, Christine, you've used the term special purpose entity.
Yes, special purpose.
Tell me what a special purpose entity is, and is it a CUD that is designated? Is it, what is this?
I'll just use that comes, it's a financial tool to allow multiple parties to own assets. So for example, in the utility world, we did this with the Highgate sub. The Highgate was owned by a percentage by all the utilities. This would be the same.
So like the
remaining in public
CUDs
control.
might own.
And there will be some private telecom providers that own part of it, but it will be under a special purpose vehicle, which will be managed, the whole network will be managed by that. It really, what you're doing, you're forming a.
And is the management different than the board, or?
Yes, yeah, you have to have a separate board for that special purpose vehicle.
But we will make sure that the public has the majority interest on that special purpose vehicle. A lot of states have just said, okay, well, you're a private telecom, you can build this little mile.
How does that entity get created? Do we have to create it?
No, we will create it. We do run that board.
So it would be like Velco, it sounds like, where the
Yeah.
public now owns the majority and then all the utilities.
Yeah, a vote was a good example.
All right, but yes, Bobby, and then we're.
When
Yeah,
will,
vote was a special purpose vehicle.
when will you know if you get approved for the grant?
We're hoping to have some indication that we've made it to the final round within the next month. The grants are going to start, they say the grants are going to start being awarded in March, but I noticed they start being awarded.
From the NTI, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, federal government part of the department.
But once again, we have a unique proposal that's going to, I believe is going to stand out and be very competitive.
So just on the timing, you were saying that if, Bobby's question, if you get the 30 million, that would help your grant application.
Yes.
But if you're hearing that whether you've made in a month, so you wouldn't be seeking to add the 30 million to the application until a later stage.
It'll be at a later stage. Right now, it's in the stage of where they're checking that we dotted the i's and crossed all the t's. The next stage will be knowing that we go into the programmatic stage, and that's where they're going to be looking at, like, well, you talked about a match. Did you secure that match? Looking at more of the detailed aspects of the grant application.
Got it.
I'm gonna go have Jimmy one more question, but I'm looking at
Yeah,
the
and
clock.
if you don't, if it's not enough time, you don't have to answer it, but the 30 million will give you an advantage in the application process, and it's because there will be less risk associated with the newly formed CUD being put in place, or the financial
demonstrates
sustainability
commitment.
going forward, or.
The match is required.
Yeah, it's a requirement
So
of
it's
the
to
state
get
statute.
to even enter the program and to get
Oh,
the
the
match.
ultimate demonstration of commitment, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's pressure on us.
All right, so let's, you have more slides?
Okay, I think we
We
hit the high
can
point.
stop, we can
We can
talk a little
stop.
bit about the FCC challenge. That's just where it's the minimum 100 million. We're encouraging, we're doing a bulk challenge. We're also encouraging Vermonters and working with various employers now to get word out to encourage Vermonters to challenge the FCC map. It's really stacked against the state and stacked against consumers. We're now taking the tact of that. The FCC says it's an iterative map. Well, this iteration isn't going to be the final iteration. So before the allotment is made, The NTIA should come and talk to the experts at each state that know what the infrastructure is
Well, we have,
happening now.
so a letter did go right from you and the speaker
Yes.
to our congressional
Yeah, and
delegation.
the reason that's important is because this gets to our goal of getting this 100% grant funded. We're going to get out of the BEAD program, the IIJA funds that are coming. $100 million minimum comes to date, but then we get another amount for each under and unserved address. And that's why we know these maps are at least 20,000 off. If you're thinking of an average of about $5,000 per address, that's $100 million. It's really worth going after.
But as we said, it's very much stacked and the FCC doesn't care about the actual speed that residents are receiving.
Oh,
They
yeah,
only
talk-
care about
Talk about your yellow,
advertised.
give your yellow milk example.
So we'll say like, so a company can advertise, we provide speeds of up to 50 megabits per second.
But
We only
only
guarantee
downtown?
10, but it's about like the gallon of the milk. When someone goes to the gas pump, they know they're getting a gallon of gas. You go out and buy a gallon of milk, you're getting a gallon of milk. You're not asked to prove that you actually got a gallon of milk and then having a lawyer for the company. tell you
Or having a gallon, you can't see it, but it says it's up to a gallon.
Up to, the whole system is, it's a valiant effort by the FCC,
Container
but it's a
white.
work in
So
progress.
you may get.
You may get a gallon, but you might
Mail
get
may
more.
get a blue.
Right, and that's something that we're also gonna be looking into, if companies are over-reporting. Like some states have problems with under-reporting and over-reporting speeds. We think it might actually be a consumer protection issue. We've already been trying to work directly with companies that we know for a fact have over-reported and they've been receptive and are correcting the record. I'll leave it at that. But it's when it comes to some technologies where that there's possible service at this location, if you cut down all the trees and chopped off the top of this mountain and the weather conditions were correct. Like there's so many variables that looking at just a propagation study and some of the theoretical doesn't add up to what's on the
We've heard from our
ground.
CUDs about that, and they've tried to
Yeah,
respond.
so I think we're done. Thank you.
So-
I'm sure you're gonna have us back. so.
Yes, your instincts are absolutely correct. I'll give you that. And appreciate the information that, it's a good update on, what you're thinking and what's been done today. So thank you.
There's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot more to do. Thank you for your support.
Well, thank you.
So I think we have the stakeholders out in the hall.